Okay, what's going on, guys? We're going to do question 16 today. So, 16 says, what main effect do the words clueless, line 38, and mind reading, line 61, have on the tone of the passage? Okay, so when I first look at this question, so there's a lot of directions that we can go in for this. Because they might be, with clueless and mind reading, trying to emphasize something specific, right? However, when they ask about tone, and it ends up kind of working in this question, it's not going to work in all questions. But when we're looking at tone, we're talking about tone in the passage. What I tell my students oftentimes is that the SAT is very simple with its tone. In reality, you can have so many different types of tone. You can have sarcastic, you can have ironic tone, you can have a disappointed tone. It's like almost like you can have as many tones as there are colors in a big crayon box with 128 colors or however many crayons they put in those things. All kinds of different shades and nuance. On the SAT, though, they sort of reduce tone not even to a box of 12 crayons. They reduce it to like two different crayons. You have a white tone and a black tone, right? And essentially, those two colors as you have an informal tone and a formal tone. That's it. And for most of the passages, you're going to have something that's formal, a formal tone. But whenever they're asking about tone, they're asking about specific words and how they affect the tone. Basically, are they casual words or are they more academic words? Are they Latin words or are they more earthy Germanic words? And that will kind of give you a sense of, is it casual or informal? I'm sorry, formal or informal. So 16 here says, what main effect do the words clueless and mind reading? So when I look at clueless and mind reading in the context of sort of like an academic discussion about this like psychological experiment, I'm starting to think maybe they're kind of leaning towards these being more informal. They are pretty casual, right? We got clueless and mind reading. But let's go back. I just want to look first at the use in the passage, get a bigger sense of how they're used in context, and then we can go down to the answer choices and start eliminating. So clueless, that comes up here. So it is not perfect insight, right? But it is also far from being clueless. It is not perfect insight, but it is also far from being clueless. And what are they talking about here? So here they're talking about the correlation that exists between people's impressions or what people think about how a group feels about them and how the group actually feels about them. And basically it says that there's a high correlation, like 0.55, and it's close to the magnitude, the correlation between the heights of whatever. So it is not perfect insight, but it is far from being clueless. What this tells us that it's not perfect insight. We don't know exactly how groups of people will feel about us, but it is still far from being clueless, right? We don't completely misunderstand how other people feel us. So we're decent at it. Down here in 61 is where we have mind reading, but perhaps this is holding your mind reading abilities to too high a standard. And this is basically saying, maybe we're being too harsh. This comes right after showing that we're not very good at understanding how particular other individuals feel about us. So this question here is the author sort of saying, maybe we're being too harsh. Maybe the reason that we're not so good at predicting how other people feel about us is because we're not really good at having a common understanding of what intelligence might mean or what trustworthiness might be, because these are sort of vague terms. Maybe the issue is not that we misunderstand, it's just that we use these terms in different ways, so they're not always going to match or be in alignment. That's fine here. In any case, though, if we focus on what mind reading is talking about, we should understand it's a little bit used tongue-in-cheek. The author isn't really talking about, doesn't really expect us to have like mind reading abilities and to actually know what another person is thinking. He's using mind reading to describe this ability just to understand what other people think about us, to have an impression of it. So when they're saying clueless or mind reading, they're sort of exaggerating these terms. They're also a little bit informal, and they're a little bit fanciful. So um, for that reason, I think my thesis at the beginning is probably going to pan out where these are being used in an informal way. But we still want to go through the answer choices, and we're going to check them out and see what we can eliminate. So A says they contribute to a casual and gently humorous tone that renders a potentially specialized discussion more approachable. So this is basically saying what I had said before about like using an informal tone because it's casual and gently humorous. That renders a potentially specialized discussion more approachable. This is pretty good. It's pretty general. All it's saying is that these words are casual and gently humorous, so it could work. B says they contribute to a slyly mocking and disapproving tone. This right here, slyly mocking, is kind of a negative characterization of the passage. And we should just pay attention to any time that a main character is being characterized negatively, or the passage itself is characterized as making this like pretty negative opinion of something. So slyly mocking is one of those. I would say it's probably not a good one, because it doesn't seem to be mocking, and just because it's negative, it's a negative view of the perspective of the passage, it's probably not right. And then it says it's a disapproving tone, and it reinforces the author's criticisms of the researcher's conclusion. So this thing is just it has a multitude of errors with it. One, it's not slightly mocking, that's too negative. Disapproving itself is probably too strong anyway, there's nothing disapproving. And the relationship between the author and the researchers is not one where the author is criticizing what the researcher is doing, they're criticizing their conclusions. It's a pretty objective reporting of what's going on. If anything, it's a little bit positively inclined. All those reasons is going to make us get rid of B. C says they contribute to a deeply pessimistic tone that stresses the impossibility of ever knowing how people truly perceive each other. Again, there's a multitude of errors here. Deeply pessimistic tone is too negative. We're never going to get a deeply pessimistic tone on one of these passages, ever. It's just not going to happen. And then we have the impossibility of ever knowing how people truly perceive each other. Again, impossibility is sort of a very strong black or white type statement, right? It's very, very extreme. We want to avoid those, right? The SAT thrives in the worlds of maybes, right? It's the maybe world. It's an almost world. It's a usually kind of world, right? It's not going to be the impossibility. And the passage never says that we will never know how people perceive each other. It's not part of this question, but right above it, it says people have a tiny glimmer of insight into how they are uniquely viewed by other people. So it might be small, we might not know exactly how other individuals feel about us, but we have at least a tiny glimmer of insight, and we are pretty good at understanding how groups of people feel about us. So C is not going to be right. D says they contribute to a thoughtful, okay, yet uncertain tone. Okay, so maybe it's thoughtful and uncertain. So far, so good. It's clueless, it's mind reading. Maybe we're being thoughtful and we're stressing the uncertainty. But then it says that it casts doubt on the real world usefulness of experimental data. Casts doubt on the real world usefulness of experimental data. So this right here, one, it's perspective that we probably never expect from the SAT or a research passage on the SAT, where they're saying that real world usefulness of experimental data is not right, that we can't use real world experimental data. So that it's not practical, right? Experimental data doesn't add anything. So for that reason, it's not going to be right. That's not the perspective of the passage, and that's not really something that we should expect an SAT passage or a research passage to ever talk about. So D is going to be wrong, which leaves us with the answer choice B for our question here.